This lesson is the second part of Chapter 8, Key Issue 2. We're going to continue by talking about the Soviet Union in 2.3. This figure, 8-17, can be found on page 274 of your textbook. This map shows the former Soviet Union as a multinational state with 15 republics that are now independent states. The Soviet Union, also known as the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR, existed between 1922 and 1991. The breakup of the USSR in 1991 resulted in the conversion of the 15 republics into 15 independent states that can be divided into 5 distinctive groups. The first distinctive group includes just Russia. The second include 3 Baltic states, including Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. The third category include 3 distinctive European states known to be Belarus, Moldova, and Ukraine. The fourth category includes 5 Central Asian states. This includes Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. On a side note, Stan is Persian for land of. The last category includes the Caucasus states. This includes Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. The reason that this region is known as the Caucasus is because it spans the Caucasus Mountains. Some of these new states are good examples of nation-states, but some are clearly multi-ethnic. It's also important to note that just because a nation-state exists does not necessarily mean that it's stable, nor does it mean that it's peaceful. With the breakup of the Soviet Union, Russia is now the world's largest multinational state. Russia comprises 81% ethnic Russians, but the government officially recognizes the existence of 39 ethnic groups among the remaining 19%. As you can see in figure 8-18, located on page 275 of your textbook, the majority population is ethnically Russian, but there are diverse groups along Russia's borders and in its center. Some have histories of self-determination. You'll notice that Russians are clustered in the western portion of Russia, and the percentage declines as you move south and east. The largest numbers of non-Russians are found between the Volga River and the Ural Mountains and near the southern borders. Russia's constitution does grant autonomy over local government affairs to around 24 of the most numerous ethnicities. Local government units with a large ethnic population are allowed to designate the ethnic language as an official language in addition to Russian. Still, it is fair to say that independence movements are still existent among several of Russia's ethnicities. After the breakup of the Soviet Union, Ukraine became its own nation-state. Ukraine possesses economic assets like coal deposits, a major steel industry, and proximity to the wealthy countries of Western Europe. Let's take a look at figure 8-19 located on page 275 of your textbook. As you can see here, Ukraine's eastern region is home to more ethnic Russians. Ukraine's minority Russian population started an uprising in the eastern region of the country, where they were clustered. They claimed that the Russian ethnic minority in Ukraine was endangered, and this gave them the claim of justification to invade the eastern Ukrainian region of Crimea. Now, the Crimea Peninsula has been the center of a lot of conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Crimea's population is approximately 60% Russian, 24% Ukrainian, and 16% other ethnicities. After the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991, Crimea actually became an autonomous republic of Ukraine. However, in 2014, Russia invaded Crimea and annexed it, claiming that the majority of the Crimean people, who are ethnically Russian, supported the action. Now, it's important to note that every other country in the world continues to recognize Ukraine's sovereignty over Crimea. However, the international community has not found a way to remove the Russians and restore Crimea to Ukraine. The focus of this next section is going to be on nation states in the former Soviet Union. As you can see here, this is a map of the former Soviet Union. Let's talk about a few of the regions. First, let's take on the 3 European states. This includes Belarus, Moldova, and Ukraine. These countries are situated between Russia to the east and European democracies to the west. Let's compare Belarus and Ukraine. The ethnic distinction between Belarusians and Ukrainians, as well as Russians, is a little blurred. This is because the 3 groups speak similar East Slavic languages. Belarusians and Ukrainians did become distinct ethnicities from Russians because they were isolated from each other after the invasions and conquests by Mongolians, Poles, and Lithuanians. This happened in the 13th century. Because of this long-running exposure to non-Slavic influences, we see a very distinctive culture that is different between Belarusians, Ukrainians, and Russians. Moldova, which makes up the 3rd European state in this category, is ethnically connected to Romanians. This is because Moldova was part of Romania until the Soviet Union seized it in 1940. When Moldova became an independent state after the fall of the Soviet Union, it tried or attempted to reunify with Romania but was unsuccessful. Because Moldova also includes other ethnicities like Ukrainians and Russians, this may contribute to why they were unsuccessful in reunifying Moldova and Romania. Now let's move into the 3 Baltic states. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are known as the Baltic states for their location on the Baltic Sea. These 3 small neighboring Baltic countries have very clear cultural differences and distinct historical traditions. All 3 states have very distinctive, different languages. Most Lithuanians are also Roman Catholic. Most Latvians are predominantly Lutheran. They do also have a substantial Roman Catholic minority, but when we look at most Estonians, they happen to be Protestant, particularly Lutherans. The next area we're going to talk about are ethnicities in the Caucasus. So this is figure 8-21, and it's located on page 276 of your textbook. Remember that the Caucasus region includes the nation states of Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. It's important to note that these countries also include non-majority ethnic populations that do seek independence or possible changes to borders. If you look at the key on the right, you can see the many ethnic groups that make up this region. Let's talk about these 3 nation states more specifically. Armenia comprises about 98% of an ethnic population of Armenians, which makes it the most ethnically homogeneous country in the region. Armenia is uniquely a Christian enclave in a region that is predominantly Muslim. In the early 20th century, it's estimated that about 1 million Armenians were killed by the Turks in actions now classified by most observers as a genocide. Although it is an independent nation today, it has a history of being conquered and controlled by Turkey and the Soviet Union. The next Caucasus country is Azerbaijan. and Azeris that make up Azerbaijan trace their roots back to Turkish invaders and Persians. Since the breakup of the Soviet Union, Azerbaijan and Armenia have had several disputes over borders. Georgia, the last country we'll discuss in the Caucasus region, has a population that's more diverse than Armenia and Azerbaijan. Georgians make up 71% of the population, and the rest is made up of multi-ethnic groups. Georgia's cultural diversity has been the source for a lot of unrest. The last region we're going to talk about includes the Central Asian states that made up the former Soviet Union. So let's take a look at figure 8-22. This is located on page 277 of your textbook. The 5 states of Central Asia that were once part of the Soviet Union have experienced varying levels of conflict without correlation to ethnic diversity. Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan are relatively stable nation-states. Kazakhstan is a relatively peaceful multinational state. Tajikistan is a relatively unstable nation-state. And Kyrgyzstan is a multinational state that has had a lot of conflict. When we look at this region, we can better understand that multinational states can sometimes be more peaceful than nation states. The last section we're going to talk about of Key Issue 2 has to do with colonies. Now, nearly all of Earth's land area has been allocated to a collection of around 200 sovereign states, but some territories remain that have not achieved self-determination or statehood. These territories are known as colonies that are legally tied to a sovereign state rather than being completely independent. In some cases, a sovereign state runs only the colony's military and foreign policy. In others, it also controls the colony's internal affairs. Figure 8-23, located on page 278 of your textbook, indicates present-day colonies that are mostly small, isolated islands or island groups. The United Nations identifies 17 places in the world that it calls non-self-governing territories. Of the 17, the Western Sahara is the most extensive as well as the most populous. The next 2 most populous are French Polynesia and New Caledonia, which are both controlled by France. All but the Western Sahara happen to be islands. The UN does not include territories that are uninhabited, and the UN also doesn't list inhabited territories that it considers to have considerable autonomy and self-governing. For example, the UN does not classify the following territories as colonies: Puerto Rico, Greenland, Hong Kong, and Macau. Colonialism is a term that we've talked about quite extensively and you should certainly be familiar with. And colonialism is often associated with European states trying to control much of the world. Colonialism is defined by an effort by one country to establish settlements in a territory and to impose its political, economic, and cultural principles on that territory. European states established colonies elsewhere in the world for 3 basic reasons. Your textbook refers to these as God, gold, and glory. Now there's a typo on page 278 where it says gold, gold, and glory, but it's supposed to say God, gold, and glory. To be specific, Europeans wanted to promote Christianity, to extract useful resources, and to serve as captive markets for their products, and to establish relative power through the number of colonies claimed. Europeans first colonized the Americas, and when the Americas gained independence, they turned their attention to Africa and Asia. The United Kingdom planted colonies on every continent all over the world. France was the second largest overseas territory and created colonies in primarily Western Africa and Southeast Asia. Most African and Asian colonies became independent after World War II. Only 15 African and Asian states were members of the UN when it was established in 1945. That number jumped up to 106 in 2012. It is important to recognize that the boundaries of the new states frequently coincide with former colonial provinces.